opened a definitive bridge between poets and such sacrosanct poetic language that could not translate awareness of the rich realities of the new context and their own individual experience within it. Written by the poet besieged first in Beirut and then in Ramallah, A State of Siege is a remarkable work that unfortunately still speaks to events today. His evocation of Gaza, that from 2007 was converted into a mere hostile entity and blockaded by land, sea, and air, even after the devastating operation Gaza led in December 2009, is prompted by the dire urgencies of the moment and moves everyone who is conscious of the extreme poverty and feelings of frustration in the street. I quote, "What is beautiful about Gaza is that our voices do not reach her. Nothing diverts her attention. Nothing turns her fist away from the face of the enemy, not the kind of Palestinian state that we will establish on the eastern side of the moon or the western side of Jupiter. Nothing diverts her attention. She is dedicated to rejection, hunger and rejection, thirst and rejection, dispersion and rejection, torture and rejection, siege and rejection, death and rejection. The enemy may defeat Gaza. The stormy sea might overwhelm a small island. They might cut down all her trees. They might break her bones. They might plant their tanks in the bellies of her women and children, or they might toss her into the sand, into the sea, into blood. But Gaza will not repeat the liars. Gaza will not say yes to the conquerors, and she will continue to erupt. It's not death, it's not suicide, it's Gaza's way of announcing she is worthy of life." The enthusiasm provoked by the World Cup or the African National Cup in the last years contrasts with the silence in Arab streets, a reflection of governmental attitudes. In the 80s and 90s, as Dرويش reminds us, I quote, "Whatever affected Palestine led to sadness, shouting, and anger in the street. Public opinion removed heads of government at the slightest affront to a hurt that was shared. Today, however, governments compete in their attempts to bribe public opinion into renouncing that place of consensus. Yes, football now occupies the place that Palestine once occupied. Let the street burn in anger. Let frustration flee to a sport that doesn't provoke tedium, that doesn't give the government the opportunity, at least up to now, to close down the stadiums." When I traveled to Egypt in November 2008, my arrival in Cairo coincided with the victory of the national team in the African Nations Cup, and Midan El Tahrir welcomed an exuberant crowd that took to the streets, waved a sea of flags, and stopped all traffic. In recent weeks, the very same Liberation Square has welcomed millions of citizens calling for democracy and freedom. I am sure that the dramatic change would have moved deeply my friend. Dروish's journey through life was that of men who suffered the incurable winds of history from an early age. He was brutally condemned to being perpetually uprooted. If literature, as Cesare Pavese said so beautifully, is a defense against the offense of life, from the publication in his youth of poems he wrote from prison in his country under Israeli occupation to the remarkable It's a Song, His defense mechanisms were enriched by a poetic and human intensity that has transformed his committed work into writing that goes beyond revolutionary militancy and moves towards the mysterious prophetic charge that impregnates the work of Mutanabi. Dرويش's moral rigor gradually attains a truly aesthetic dimension. When the plains disappear, the doves fly. Why, they wash the cheeks of the sky on free winds, reconquering beauty and the realms of the air and their games. Higher and higher fly the white doves. If only the sky was for real, a man says to me, walking by between two bombs. The bitter history of the last decades finds within the poet the voice of the lone man in the crowd of whom Ibn Arabi speaks. That voice able to express lucidly and with precise, beautiful words the barbarity of the occuper and the disloyalty of those who abandoned the project of democratizing Arab societies, who sought refuge in confessional style and used the defeat of their would-be holy case to indulge their desire for power and to settle accounts with their rivals. I quote, because Palestine has ceased to be a country and has become a slogan that, rather than being put into practice, is simply used to justify whatever happens, to embellish coup d'etat, to break political parties, to ban the cultivation of wheat, to replace the sweat of the brow with easy money. From Journal of an Ordinary Grief, Yawmiyat al-Husum al-Adi, to text published posthumously, Mahmoud Darwish's poetic work that I have read in French, English, or Spanish translation has continuously assumed new forms while retaining its unmistakable voice. The poet doesn't transform the word into a weapon of combat on behalf of a just case. He defends the latter by projecting a light that also illumines his opponent, who, in the name of the biblical promise, as a result of European anti-Semitism and the monstrosity of the Holocaust, deprive him of his land and force him to wander and live between prison and velvet wire. Mahmoud Darwish, with remarkable dignity, tells us, I quote, "It's the duty of not only the Jew to remember the Nazi massacres, all people whose conscience is still alive, and all friends of freedom share the memory of the victims of Nazism. No matter the degree of enmity between Arabs and Israelis, no Arab has the right to feel that his enemy's enemy is his friend, because Nazism is the enemy of all peoples." In effect, Darwish's poetry also addresses itself to Israelis who have a sense of justice. They exist, even though in a little minority, to remind them that the horror of the Holocaust doesn't justify the permanent humiliation that condemns Palestinians to live in their own land under an apartheid regime that violates all the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council and the international laws established in its founding charter. The disturbing isolation of Palestinians, despite the good intentions of Obama and the fine words of the European Union, is rendered even more intense by Arab governments' resigning acceptance of Israel's policy of colonization. The devastating WikiLeaks revelation in terms on the latter endorsed the poet's sarcasm. For how long will Palestinians continue to disrupt Arabs' post-prendial peace and quiet with dead bodies that interrupt the afternoon's American mutsasala? The cynicism that reigns in the palace and governments of the Middle East makes every honest individual, whatever Arab or non, feel like vomiting. one has to read and reread Dرويش in order not to lose hope. Please forgive me if I return by way of conclusion to the words I wrote years ago. I recognize myself there, and unfortunately, the context in which they are inscribed has not changed. The Palestine that was stolen from him in his childhood is not paradise lost, like Al-Andalus in the work of classical and modern Arab poets, but one that is still to be created, and hence one endows his poems with a lucidity that springs from a vision of a tranquil, hate-free history, emotion and sorrow that share calm and sober above the dramatic vicissitude of the moment and are mysteriously imbued with a dazzling prophetic light. Like his Arab and European masters, Mahmoud Darwish could find the right voice to communicate a complex range of emotions and feelings, both to his fellow countrymen and those who, embedded in different cultural and historical frames, seeks in poetry a verbal reality, the beauty of which strikes the imagination, whatever the immediate object or case that inspires it. The horror or indignation any honest person feels before the miseries of his people cannot be encompassed by the rather limited concept of commitment that now abounds. As Dرويش himself says, the only possible way to be a Palestinian writer and poet is to fight in defense of soul and the skin. Shukran jidan.
مبروك للأديب الإسباني الكبير، وشكرا له لأنه نطق بالعربية أولا، التي يبدو أنها أفضل من إسبانيتنا قليلا. الآن مع المعهد الوطني للموسيقى، ثم نكرم مبدعنا الكبير محمود شخير.